And joining us now to further explore this topic of the Chinese regime's unrestricted warfare is Cynthia Sun. She's a research fellow with the Falun Gong Information Center and a fellow with the First Freedom Foundation. Thanks for joining us this morning, Cynthia. Now, there's an irony here, right? There's no independent judicial system or media freedoms in China under the communist regime, yet the CCP uses these pillars of American society against us. Can you give some examples of how the CCP has targeted Falun Gong founded organizations like Shenyun by leveraging our judicial system against us?
Sure. So it really is an irony. Most people don't know this, but Chinese citizens cannot use Instagram, cannot use X, cannot use YouTube or uncensored Google without a VPN. And so the way that the CCP has wholly taken America unprepared is through our legal system and through our media. You know, on the screen right now, you see a graph that my organization created. In the past 2 years, Shenyun and Falun Gong practitioners across the US have faced threats, including bomb threats, shooting threats, fire arson threats, rape threats across the US. And this is in 18 states, 26 cities so far, as of last week. And, you know, a majority of these are essentially trying to silence this community. Falun Gong has exposed the CCP's crimes on the world scale. And if this playbook that Beijing and Xi Jinping have devised back in 2022 is able to play out and effectively silence this community, then they've gotten their goal. You know, multiple investigations have been started against Shenyun. For example, last year there were 2 Chinese spies that were sentenced because they were targeting Shenyun. They tried to bribe who they thought was an IRS agent to take away the nonprofit status of this performing arts company. And can you guess how many years they were sentenced? It was less than 2 each. And so I personally believe that these people, one of which who is a US citizen, should get their citizenship revoked and be deported out of the country. But this is just one example out of many.
Yeah, you mentioned really extreme things like a bomb threat, threats of murder, threats of rape. This has led Indiana State Representative Craig Haggard to declare that these are terror actions. These are actually terrorist actions through proxies by the Chinese Communist regime committed here on U.S. soil. It's hard to understand and believe that as an American who may not be familiar with the tactics of the Communist Party. Why does the Chinese Communist Party target groups based on ethnicity or religion? And why do they attempt to extend that violence to the U.S.? What's their ultimate goal?
Yeah, so if you look at the history, the Chinese Communist Party was built on violence and atheism. That's the core of the Communist Party in China. And so obviously with Falun Gong, which is a faith group, and with other ethnicities, it's very difficult for the Chinese Communist Party to control the narrative like they have with a majority of atheist Han Chinese. And so it's very much that spirit, that undying spirit of freedom, of religion, of faith, of identity and individualism that the CCP is trying to crush in order to, go ahead with their political plans, with their political goals. And over history, Falun Gong has been brutally persecuted. It's nearly 26 years since the previous CCP head, Jiang Zemin, started the persecution. And so the goal in America is really to silence this group and to control the diaspora 2-3 generations down. I saw a statistic yesterday that said Gen Z has 28% of Gen Z has a favorable, connotation towards the word communism. They have a favorable opinion of communism. And this varies starkly with, the boomer and silent generation, which is 6% and 3% respectively. So I think it's very dangerous, the world that we're living in right now and how unprepared America is against the CCP's tactics and this playbook of silencing anyone that don't agree with the CCP.
Now, this concept of unrestricted warfare, it's about using non-military means. I think most Americans are familiar with the pervasiveness of TikTok amongst the younger generation. Studies have been done to show that users of TikTok are more sympathetic to Hamas than non-users of TikTok. So I was hoping you might be able to cite any examples of how the CCP subverts Western media and or uses the legal system to advance its agenda, these non-military means to infiltrate our society.
Sure. I don't know if people have heard of China Daily, the newspaper, or other state media that are being printed and published and distributed in America, but media like that really influences the way that Chinese Americans see America or see the world. And a few years back, there was also a report about how the Chinese state media, including China Daily, would put advertisements into top 3, top 10 newspapers in America, like the New York Times and others. And it looks like an article, but it's actually an advertisement that the Chinese state media paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to place in our legacy media. So that's just one example of trying to use our own institutions that we have established for freedom and democracy and freedom of thought and the First Amendment, using those established institutions to carry their message. And essentially, then state and local media will repeat those because they believe that it's organic and coming from an American source, but it's not. And so, we've seen a series of articles starting from last August from the New York Times that actually attacks Shenyun and says very little about the entire context of why Shenyun was founded in America, why for 18 years now, over 1,000 performers have gladly toured the world to really advocate for faith and advocate for freedom in China. And they're showcasing a China before communism. Like, I don't think any American would argue against that message and against that logo and that motto of hope. So it's just incredible the way the system has been used against us. And I think we should all be very wary.
And maybe to finish off on some good news, it seems like the U.S. is waking up. We saw what Congressman Perry is doing. So what else is being done to counter the regime's unrestricted warfare against the U.S.?
Yeah, so, all of these threats that I mentioned earlier, as we're documenting them, the Falun Gong Information Center is reporting it to local, state, federal officials and authorities. And so far, luckily, there haven't been any acts of violence at any of the shows or at any of the parades that Falun Gong practitioners have attended or hosted. And this is obviously a relief, but going forward, we're hoping that an interagency federal organization is able to further investigate transnational repression, because documentation is only one part, and obviously no acts of violence have occurred, which is such a relief. But I think there's more steps to be done, and you're right, Congress is waking up. I know last year there were several hearings about transnational repression. The CCP subcommittee, House Oversight, multiple different subcommittees and committees have spoken out publicly against the CCP using our legal system. So there is awareness on the Hill, and I think we just need to put it into action with investigations and different things.
Well, we appreciate your insights as well as the important work you do. Cynthia Sun, Research Fellow at the Falun Gong Information Center and a Fellow with the First Freedom Foundation. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.